Welcome back to our OSLC Connect for Jira training. I'm Robert Polarion. In this session, we're going to focus on how to configure Jira for your Polarion environment. Specifically, we're going to work on some of our process level supports to be able to make sure that when you're in Jira, you can see information from Polarion, be able to structure how the mapping takes place for when you go to create issues from Polarion into Jira, what link types you can create from Jira into Polarion, as well as what attributes we can report on, and some simple demonstrations of how we can use the Polarion data within Jira to be able to control workflow. So stay tuned to this session. We'll walk you through it. We'll show you some videos, and let's go ahead and show it live. Let's start by looking at our link appearance modifier. So in here, I have just a simple Jira ticket with an OSLC link, or actually a couple links. What we can see here is we have access to those artifacts. We can be able to do a rich hover and be able to see critical information on this, like the status being approved on this item, and then the status on this item being draft. What we found with our users is that some of that information was actually more critical and more relevant sooner than having to do the rich hover on each item. So we added a link appearance, in this case a decorator, that allows us to be able to have access to that information immediately and have it be dynamically updated. So if you go to the Jira admin pages, you can take a look at administration, you can look at link appearance, and we have the option to be able to put the status and the priority directly on those links. So if I enable status information in this admin page, what our users will see when they come to these pages is they will see a decorator on here, tells them the status. So in this case, approved and draft. This information is relevant to us and important for us to be able to take a look at. Now, in addition to that, we also allow ourselves to be able to add some more information on there. So in case we find that color is valuable to us, we can do things like take a look at approved. Maybe we want to actually show that in a specific color. I can be able to make that green. It's a good identifier for us to be able to see information just readily processed by us as engineers as we take a look at these environments, and be able to have that information there and give me a visual indicator of that. Alternatively, if I wanted to be able to add some other things, I could actually make this draft. And we can actually do, instead of just color, we can do an icon. We can add a URL of our choice. Maybe we want to be able to say that this is something that we want to have some warning about. If it's in a draft state, we can have that visual indicator on that as well. So we can look at this item, be able to refresh it, and have access to this. This is a great way for people to be able to have more visible information from Polarion dynamically in their Jira ticket without actually having to navigate to Polarion or even have to do the rich hover. It's just a more natural way for them to be able to see that information. Next, let's take a look at issue type mapping. So this is somewhat as you'd expect. What we're trying to do is map a specific issue type to an OSLC type. What this means is, from the OSLC standard, is that when another tool wants to generate a defect or an implementation item, what artifact type do we want to generate from Jira for that tool? In this case, from Polarion, when I want to generate an implementation item, what type do I create? We organize these based on a scheme level. So this is kind of following your process structure. You can set for your Jira scheme how you want those things to appear. So right now I have just some basic definitions right now, following the OSLC standard, that there's these basic usage types. So if someone goes to generate a defect, we're going to create a bug. If someone wants to do an implementation request, we're going to create a story. These are all configurable. You can see the different options here. And how these get presented in Polarion is pretty straightforward. So on my implementation item here, I can go to generate OSLC artifact. If I go to create a new item and go ahead and pick a plan item, that's going to automatically generate a story for me. So that's going to do that implementation request for me. Alternatively, if I decided that on this item I wanted to be able to generate a defect, it's going to go ahead and generate that bug for me and automatically pick that type for me. So it allows me to have a simple mapping between the common OSLC types and my Jira types. And that's the intention here, and you can customize those for your process. Now let's take a look at link type mapping, which is an interesting configuration that we added. Mainly it's around process configuration. What we noticed as we built out our tool is that when engineers went to do it, perform linking, they had lots of options. Options sometimes are good. Options can sometimes be confusing. So in this case, on this task in Jira, when I go to collaboration link, and I pick my link type, I actually have lots of different link types associated here. This is because I have different associations to Polarion. Some of them are quality management relationships, some are requirements management relationships, some are change management relationships. Now, all these relationships might be valid in the whole of my relationships between Jira and Polarion, but they might not be specific to that type within Jira. So if I have a task type or a story type, maybe I want to constrain how somebody wants to be able to pick those relationships, and that's what we've added. So the default relationship is, wow, I get all these different options to be able to interact with, and I can create a new or link to an existing requirement. Now, if I take a look at link type mapping, because these are process configurations, I go ahead and organize them based on scheme. So in this case, let's look at the scheme that this project is utilizing. I don't have any configurations yet, but let's do some configurations based on the tasks. So one of the configurations we have is maybe we always want to have a standard link type. Well, let's make it easy for engineers to pick the type of relationship we're typically going to be doing. So maybe on a task, we always want to have that relates to a change management item and just a tracks relationship. And maybe we want to maybe we want to go one step further and say, you know what, we don't want them to create task relationships to all items. Let's go ahead and disable most of the items. You'll see that we always keep that tracks relationship, but maybe I want to be able to allow you to track to requirements as well. And I have options here. I can do selection only or selection and creation. I'll show you the difference between the two because tracks is selection and creation already made available. And I can go ahead and save that configuration. And you'll notice that we can actually do that in each of our individual Jira types. We can set up our own configuration. So now when I'm on this task and go to create a new collaboration link, we should see a difference. So when I go to this collaboration link, we'll actually see that our default link type is that tracks definition that we had before. I can also pick only tracks or tracks requirements. What this will do is it will give some simple enforcement to engineers to pick relationships you want them to use. And this should actually correlate to the relationships that you want to have defined in Polarion. So it's a way to be able to scale down the relationships people are making and have them conform to your process. The other thing we noted is that we can control whether or not you can create or a new item or link to an existing item. When I set on tracks, I allowed you to create or pick to an existing item. When we did tracks requirement, we said we only can link to an existing item. This disables the option to be able to create a requirement directly from Jira. So it's really great about creating process conformance, being able to make sure teams are utilizing the tools the way your team wants them to utilize it. So please take advantage of that and leverage that with your teams. So let's talk a little bit about issue shapes and how it interacts between Jira and Polarion and how we can take advantage of this. So within OSLC, shapes describe a resource. So think of this as the set of attributes associated with an artifact type. From a change management perspective, from Jira's perspective, we focus on issues. So these change requests have a certain set of attributes. In fact, from that standard and from our default implementation in Jira, this shape of an issue contains this set of attributes. And these are a standard set of attributes that you can always expect as being reported from Jira as an OSLC tool to other OSLC tools. But the question is, what if you add additional attributes? How are those accounted for? And that's really what this issue shape concept is about. We can, within Jira now, on a per scheme basis, add or extend that shape, basically saying to whatever consuming OSLC tool we have, by the way, there's all these other attributes that might be associated with this issue. You can utilize these in your presentations, your reports, any of your services that consume OSLC. So in fact, if we take a look at something like a Jira to Polarion issue that I have right now, it's a story. When we have stories within Jira, oftentimes we have things like story points. If we're doing our agile planning, we have sprints. We want to capture that data, and we do within Jira. What you need to know, though, is that information by default isn't always included into those shapes. So always make sure that you take a look at these default set of attributes, and then you can go into a particular scheme within Jira and add those attributes in there. You'll see that we'll have a selection for all of our custom attributes. Some of them are going to be green, like our story points and our sprints. The reason why they are that way is because we know those are known data types that we've extended within Jira. Some of these other data types, things with yellow, we're not sure in terms of what data type those are. They might have some custom rendering on it. Things that are red, we know have custom rendering within Jira, and so they're not conducive for reporting data. So to give you a sense of what happens behind the scenes, we can go down kind of the low level of REST tool like Insomnia here, and we can see, we can go to a specific issue that I want to be able to retrieve. I can make a OSLC request to get this information, and we're going to see those standard sets of attributes that I had. So we'll see things like who the creator was, what status it is, what the priority is, our identifier, those common types. Now, the other things we want to be able to do is we want to be able to see this, the story points in there. We want to be able to see the sprint information in there as well. So that's just a save for me away. So once I actually hit save here, that's going to update the shape in Jira, update what we're going to report out to other tools that request that information. And so the next time that I actually make a request here, I can send a new request. We should see more content here, including information about my sprint. And we should be able to see my story points in here as well. We'll see this 10 in here for story points. So that gives you a sense of what happens behind the scenes. Now, the nice thing is about tools like Polarion that are OSLC tools, they can take advantage of this information. And they often do in things like reporting. So if we go to a report within Polarion, you can be able to see, let's just go ahead and refresh this report real quick here. This is showing a report of Polarion artifacts along with Jira artifacts. And what you should be able to see here is that not only do I have the Polarion details, but I also have the Jira details in here as well. So you see things like type, ID, the Jira status, the priority, the description information. That's information that I've actually programmatically put into my script within Polarion to be able to pull that OSLC data out using some of the Polarion APIs. Now, if I had a custom attribute like I just did, I'd have to be able to add some more details on how I want to extract that information. And we can actually even go through and take a look at this, this script and where we're actually putting in those specific attributes. I could put things in like story points in here and be able to make sure that it's actually retaining that information. You'll see that same Jira custom field data in here as well. And so when I apply this change to the script, you're going to be able to see that I will actually be able to report on story points. So think of this as any of the other custom attributes you might be able to add. So this is some of the power of OSLC, the power of Polarion, and being able to report on that Jira data within this OSLC framework. So it's capabilities you can leverage. Now, a couple things, because we dove into a little bit of code, a little bit of scripts in here as well. We don't expect you to grab all that from a short video. We do want to point out our documentation, our docs.SodiusWillert.com. On this webpage, you'll be able to find details that we went through today, so you can take a look at custom fields and be able to find out how to access custom fields via OSLC. We'll have a document on this that will give you more details, so you can dive into it, see examples. Things like reporting. If we want to take a look at reporting, we can also take a look at reporting OSLC data with Siemens Polarion. You're going to see some basic reports in there. You'll actually see some examples of doing reports in here, including some of the scripting details, so you can take advantage of that and use that on your own time and on your own systems. So that environment's always being updated, so take a look back. If you have questions, you might be able to find the answer right there. So much of the configurations we do are for doing process enhancement and process guidance. We saw earlier with link decorators that these are a visual indication of data that's contained within Polarion that helps guide us in some decision making we as engineers might make. The nice thing about this is we can go one step farther. In addition to doing things like making sure that we visually see what the status of a requirement is, we can actually get more impactful. Right now, as I have the system configured, I can move this item to in progress at ease. We're not using any of this data that's associated with OSLC in making any of these decisions. Now, on the other hand, what we've added in our product of recent is a validator. What a validator does in Jira is allows us to be able to put rules on a transition. So we look at the workflow that we have. We can look at the workflow of moving into in progress, and we can look at our validators there. Here I can add a simple OSLC validator, so with OSLC property match. And what I want to do here is take a look by different link relationships. In this case, we're talking about implements requirements. We want to be able to make sure that all of our requirements are in an approved state before we make those transitions. And so we can add these rules onto our workflow, and we can make these as simple as complex as we want. And we can publish these into our Jira system. What this allows us to do is be able to take a process step that we want engineers to exercise and enforce that, and enforce it in a way that uses the data from Polarion in the actions that we perform. So in this case, now if somebody tries to be able to move in progress, we're going to get a warning that tells us, hey, wait a minute, item 433 was still in the status of draft, and we're looking for this to be in an approved state before we continue. So until this item, and I can actually open this link in a new tab. Let's go to this item. Let's actually approve it so that you can see that that workflow is really going to work for us, because it makes sure that this item over in Polarion actually has to go through these sets of steps to be able to get to an approved state before we can actually make any of those transitions. So before we actually fully approve it, we'll be able to see this transition from in this draft state. We should see now in this reviewed state. If we went one step farther and actually finished saving this and this is now approved, what we're going to see is when I go ahead to do this movement to in progress, it's going to dynamically pull that information. It's going to see that it's approved and allow me to be able to move in progress. And you'll see how that status is actually up there. So this is really a great way to be able to enforce process, be able to have a combination of these visual indicators that give us guidance to where we're at, as well as the enforcement via the validators that make sure that we're using that data across the repository boundary and be able to make sure these tools and OSLC works for us together. One of the great features about OSLC is the ability to be able to show remote content within a local tool. So in this case, in Polarion, I have access to information about my Jira artifacts within Polarion. So I can see that I have a story here. I can see details about what type it is, what priority it is, what the status is. I might not show all the information that I might want or might need. And that's because each Jira environment's a little bit different. And so if I look at this artifact locally and within Jira, I'm going to see information like sprints, like story points. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to include that on my rich preview as well? In fact, we can. So the ability to customize happens at the scheme level, but I can also further customize by this specific type of artifact. So in this case, what we're going to use is we're going to use screen definitions within Jira to describe what content we want to include on a rich preview. So in this case, let's just customize our story. I have a screen that I've been working on here. Let's see, my story screen. And I can go ahead and save that definition. Now, the configuration of this screen right now is simply story points and my tab. So this is a heading on a tab that would be typically on a screen. And we're going to use that as a section within that rich preview. So now if I go back into Polarion and go take a look at my artifact item here, what we're going to see is we have this my tab and we have the story points that are dynamically readily available. In fact, if I went over here and changed my story points, and change that to 5, I'm going to come back over in here, do a rich preview, and I'm going to immediately see that. We also see that these headings are configurable. So if I wanted to be able to change this to be able to say, maybe story, let's update this to be able to be story planning. I can see more details on that. Next time I do this rich hover, I'm going to be able to see that titles change. So we have a lot of freedom to be able to do this. I can add additional sections if I want. So let's go back to our screen. We can add another tab. So we can do sprint planning. And I can add the sprint details in here as well. Sprint details. I can add even the reporter in here maybe. And add some more information. And so once I have that information, once I update this screen, we're going to immediately see when I come over to this item, I'm going to have those details on this rich preview. So we have a lot of control over what information that's contained in there. You can pick that based on type because we know a bug's different than a story. And this way you can have more visibility to your Jira items within Polarion. Thanks for joining another one of our training sessions. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us and find us at SodiusWillert.com. Thank you.